Yehoshua Parak Chavdala. So last week we looked at Parak Chav Gimel, which was I'm just going to go back one chapter. This was the chapter we looked at last week. Vayihim yamim rabim, acharei asher haniach Hashem lisom lekol avehem misaviv, Yehoshua zaken ba bayamim. The end of Yeshua's life. He dies at 110. We are many years after the end of the conquest and the division of tribes, if you remember. And that was only 14 years, according to Chazal, maybe a few more. Now this jumps forward to Yehoshua at the end of his life. This is chapter 23. This is a quick snapshot from last week. And Yeshua is old. Yeshua zaken ba bayamim. And he calls over the elders. Vayikra Yehoshua l'cho Yisrael lizkenav, l'roshav, l'shoftav, l'shotrav, all the elders, all of the heads, all the judges, all the officers, all the people who will essentially be in charge at various levels. Vayomer alehem, and he says to them, Ani zakanti bati bayamim, I'm old, I'm advanced in years. And to summarize the rest of the chapter, we've done a lot, but we haven't finished. Okay, and therefore I'm challenging you to finish the job, because whatever we don't finish, the Canaanites that will remain will be a thorn in our sides and will lead to all kinds of problems culturally and religiously. That's more or less what chapter 23 was about. Fast forward now one chapter to chapter 24. And ve'esof Yehoshua et kol shiftei Yisrael Shechema. Yeshua gathers all the tribes of Israel to Shechem. Vayikra, and he calls to Ziknei Yisrael u'l'roshav u'l'shoftav u'l'shotrav, to the elders, to the judges, to the heads, to the officers. Sounds like the same group that we just saw in chapter 23 last week. Vayityatzvu lifnei ha'elokim, and they stood before God. Vayityatzvu lifnei ha'elokim. Just as a quick reminder, this verse sounds very similar to the opening verse of Parshat Nitzavim, which is not on the source page, nor is it on my open tabs. So we're going to do this. You're going to forgive me. We're going to go to Chumash Devarim Perek Chavtet, beginning of Parshat Nitzavim. Atem Nitzavim Hayom, right? Moshe, in Nitzavim is in the end of Dvarim. Moshe engages in a brit with all of Israel. Atem Nitzavim Hayom Kulchem, you stand today before God. Lifnei Hashem Elokechem, Roshechem, Shiftechem, Ziknechem, Shotrechem, your heads, your tribes, your elders, your officers. That's the same language. Kol ish Yisrael, all of Israel. Le'ovrecha bivrit Hashem Elokecha v'alatot, in order to enter into a covenant with God and an oath, which God makes with you today. Hashem Elokecha koret imcha hayom. That brit, of course, brit of Avot Moav, which we will maybe address a little bit later. That's Parshat Nitzavim. In our parak, coming back to Yeshua Parak of Dalid, again, Yeshua takes all the people of Israel, the heads of all the tribes, and he goes to Shechem. It's almost the same language. He brings them all to Shechem, and they present themselves before God, they stand before God, which is usually a reference to the ark, to the Shekhinah, to the presence of the Shekhinah or the Mikdash. Of course, that begs the immediate question before we even move into the rest of the parak, which is the most obvious, stunning question in this opening verse, just before we go anywhere. And it's going to be the main subject of our discussion today and probably next week too. Which is, how did we get to Shechem? What are we doing in Shechem? Where is the Mishkan at this moment in time?
Shiloh.
In Shiloh, right? In Shiloh. And we'll see in a few minutes the extent to which the Mefarshim go to figure out how we can be before God and be in Shechem at the same time. That's really quite a feat. So I leave that as an open question. We will come back to it. That is the major subject of this parak. But first, we need to read it and understand what's going on. Vayomer Yehoshua el kol ha'am. Yeshua said to all the people. And here, this I mentioned already last week, the fundamental difference between the opening of chapter 23 and the opening of chapter 24. The opening of chapter 23, same group of people. Yehoshua gathers together all of the tribes, Kenav, Zoshav, Shuftav, Shotrav, all the elders, heads, judges, leaders, etc. Chapter 24, it does the same thing. Ziknei Yisrael, Oshav, Shuftav, Shotrav. Big difference being, Vayomer Yehoshua el kol ha'am. Chapter 23, he was speaking to the leadership. In chapter 24, he gathers all the leaders, but then he turns his attention to the people. Yehoshua el kol ha'am. And now he starts a speech. So before we can break it down, understand it, figure out what's going on, we need to read it. And it's a long speech. So bear with me today. A lot of it is going to be just to get through the text. Ka amar Hashem Elokei Yisrael. Thus says Hashem, God of Israel. Your ancestors dwelt in the time of old beyond the river. Terach, Avi Avraham, Vavi Nachor. Our story started in the days of Terach, father of Avraham, father of Nachor. Vayavdu elim acharim. Terach and his children and his family were idol worshippers, which, by the way, is the only single reference we have in the entire Tanakh that Terach was an idol worshipper. All the medrash and all of the stories that we teach our children from the day that they're able to walk and talk, that Abraham and father's idols, etc., it's all wonderful midrashim. The only textual reference we have, but it's significant and it's enough, that Terach was an idol worshipper, is this verse right here. Terach, Avi Avraham, Avi Nachor, V'yavdu Elohim Acharim. They served other gods. And says, again, Yeshua, in the name of God, V'ekach et avichem et Avraham me'ever hanar. Took Avraham from Ever Hanar, from the other side of the river. V'olech oto b'chol eretz Canaan. I brought him to the land of Canaan. V'arbe'et zar'o v'etenu et Yitzchak, and I multiplied his seed, and I gave him Yitzchak. V'eten li Yitzchak et Yaakov et Esav, and Yitzchak had two children, he had Yaakov and he had Esav. V'eten li Esav et har seir l'reshet oto, v'Yaakov v'banav yotu Mitzrayim. Esav went to Har Seir, and Esav went to Edom, and that was his land. But Yaakov and his children, continuation of the line of Avraham and Yitzchak, Yaakov and his children went down to Mitzrayim. And there, of course, we know what happened to them. But Veshlachet Moshe v'Aaron, I sent them messengers, I sent them leaders, I sent them Moshe and Aaron. V'gofet Mitzrayim, smote Egypt. Kasher asiti b'kirbo, all the wonders that I did in their midst. V'achar hotzeiti etchem, and then I took you out. V'otzi et avotechem b'Mitzrayim, I took your fathers out of Egypt. V'tavo hayama, and you came to the sea. V'yirdefu Mitzrayim acharei avotechem, Egypt came running after you. B'rechev, b'farashim, b'yam suf, and with horses and chariots at the Red Sea. V'yitzaku el Hashem, you cried out to God. V'yasem ma'afel b'neichem u'b'nei Mitzrayim. God put darkness between you and the Egyptians. V'yaveh alav et hayam yechaseu, and he brought the sea down upon them and covered them. To do that, you have to first split the sea, which, of course, is not in the text, but it's an assumption, right? That at some point or another, the split had to split in order for it to come down upon the Egyptians. You saw with your own eyes all that I did in Egypt. And then you dwelt in the desert, in the wilderness, in the midbar, for many years, for many days, many years. But finally, finally you came to the land of the Amorites, on the other side of the Yarden, the land of Sichon, the land of Og. They waged war with you, they went to war with you. But I gave them to your hands. You took their land. I destroyed them before you. Sidebar, Vayakam Balak ben Zippor melech Moab vayilachem b'Yisrael. There was another battle, a battle between Balak ben Zippor, king of Moab, and Israel. Vayishlach vayikal Bilam ben Beor lekalel etchem. He went and he sent for Bilam to curse you. But I didn't let him. V'lo aviti lishmo leBilam vayivarech baruch etchem, and he blessed you. Batzil etchem miyado. I delivered you out of his hands. Atavru et hayarden. Crossed over the Yarden. Sorry, my apologies. Give me 1 second. I have to just close the door to my study in a second. Sorry about that. Vatavruot hayarden. Then you crossed over the Yarden. Vatavo Yericho. And the first city you came to was Yericho. Vayelachamu bachem. Yericho, they fought against you. Ba'alei Yericho, the masters of Yericho, the inhabitants of Yericho, either with or as of the Amori, Prizi, Knani, Achiti, Girgashi, Achivi, Hibusi, the 7 nations of Canaan, and I gave all these 7 nations into your hands. And then I sent that, there's a reference in Chumash to the story, I sent the hornet or some kind of animal before, insect before you, and he drove out from before you even the 2 kings of the Amorites, not with your sword, not with your bow, but rather they started to run, they started to flee, they started to be afraid. And you began to settle in land that you did not have to build, cities that you did not have to create. And vineyards and olive yards, which you didn't plant, but you get to eat. All of this is the story from the days of Terach, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Mitzrayim, and exit from Mitzrayim, Kriyat Yamsuf, various events in the Midbar, the wars with Sichon and Og, and the story of Bilam and Balak, and the crossing of the Yarden. And now, Yata. Yeruat Hashem, fear God. V'ivdu oto, b'tamimu ve'emet, serve him with whole sincerity and with truth. Remove the gods which your fathers served in the days of Terach. Get rid of the idols that your ancestors worshipped in Egypt. Ve'ivdu et Hashem. Serve God. Ve'im ra be'enechem lavot et Hashem. And if that is evil to you to serve God, if that is not something that you think you can do, so says Yehoshua to the people, Bacharu lechem hayom et mi ta'avodun. So choose, who do you want to serve? Im et Elokim asher avdu avatechem im Elohim asher avdu avatechem asher me'eva hayanahar. Do you want to serve the gods that your fathers served beyond the river in the days of Terach? Or do you want to serve the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are in their midst? But no, as for I, me, and my household, we will serve God. Pause. There's that little pay here, which means there's a paragraph break. There's a parashia, there's a pause. All the words start with a pay. And vayan ha'am vayomer. People respond and they said, said the people to Yehoshua, God forbid that we should abandon God and serve other gods. No, it is Hashem who took us out of Egypt. It is Hashem who took us out of the house of bondage. Who did all these great wonders for us, and who guarded us and protected us in all the journey, and who helped us fight against all these nations of God who expelled the Amorites and the Canaanites from before us. Therefore, we will serve God, for He is our God. So Yehoshua gave them a choice. He gave them an option for a moment, and they chose to follow God. And Yehoshua is not finished. I'm not buying it. You can't do it. You can't serve God. God is a holy God. El Kanohu, He is a jealous God. He will not tolerate transgression. He will not tolerate sin. You will forsake God. And you will worship strange gods. He will then turn and do more evil to you than it meant before. He will destroy you. You sure? No, we mean it. We will serve God. And now Yehoshua again says to the people, you are witnesses. I have your oath. I have your word on this. You choose God here to serve Him. We take that testimony. Says Yehoshua, therefore now, so now take all your idols that are in your midst and remove them. And incline your heart to God. The people said to Yehoshua, Et Hashem Elokeinu na'avod uvekolo nishma. We will serve God and we will listen to His words. Not an ambiguous reference here to the parallel of Naaseh v'nishma in this verse. Vayichrot Yehoshua brit la'am bayomahu. Yehoshua then engages with the people in a brit. He makes a brit with them, covenant. Vayasem lo chok u'mishpat b'Shechem, and he makes the statute and ordinance in Shechem. Vayichtov Yehoshua tatarim ha'ele b'sefer Torat Elokim, and he writes this down b'sefer Torat Elokim. Vayikach even gdolah, takes a large stone, vayikimeh Hashem, and he established it there tachat ha'alah Asher b'mikdash Hashem, under the oak that was by the sanctuary of God, in the city of Shechem. Vayomer Yehoshua kol ha'am, hinei ha'eben hazot tiyeh banu le'edah. This stone will be like a witness, testimony, ki shama'at kol imrei Hashem asher diber imanu, because it hears all the words which God spoke. And it will be a testimony lest you deny God. And then Yehoshua sent them back to their land, to their inheritance. I'm going to stop here. The rest of this parak, even if we finish this parak today, the rest of this parak is for sure going to be our first year in Sefer Shoftim. We're going to bridge the book of Shoftim with the remaining part of this chapter. This chapter is there's a lot to unpack here. It's I call it it's bombastic, it's enormous, it's dramatic, and it's very problematic. Yehoshua, unlike there are essentially two moments where Yehoshua, in the end of the book, brings the people together for final instructions. I call it the epilogue of final message. In the previous chapter, He was talking to the elders. He was talking about the conquest, which was finished or not finished. And he was old and he was weak and he was handing over the mantle of leadership to whoever takes over. Where did that chapter take place? It's unclear. In chapter 23, it's unclear where it took place, but I can make a fair assumption. Where would Yehoshua have gathered the people together at the end of his life? Certainly only one answer to that question. Where would he have gathered everybody together? The leaders, at least.
In Shiloh?
Shiloh. Reasonable assumption. That's what the Mishkan is. That's where the seat of leadership would have been. He would have gathered them in Shiloh. Suddenly in chapter 24, first of all, he's talking to all the people, a kol ha'am. He enacts a brit with them. He enacts a covenant with them, and this covenant is a serious conversation. It's a Mamad Hasinai style conversation. Do you want to keep the Torah? Do you not want to keep the Torah? Yes, you do want to keep the Torah. He challenges them. He says, you won't be able to. You won't be successful at it. You'll fail, and God will be angry at you. And all of this in Shechem. And on top of the fact that he's in Shechem, then there's a Mikdash Elokim b'Shechem. What has happened? How did we suddenly get to Shechem? The Mishkan is in Shiloh. So that's where our story begins. There's a lot of pieces of this puzzle that need to be unpacked, including who he's talking to and how he got to Terach and the story of Terach. But let's start with the basic question. How does he get to Shechem? How is it possible that in Shechem there is a presence of God, there is a Vayitetzu lifnei Elokim? Not only is Vayitetzu lifnei Elokim, but at the end of the chapter, he takes all of the, he makes them take an oath. Vayakimeh Hashem, he takes a stone and he turns it into an aid and he writes the words of the Torah. Tachat ha'ala asher b'mikdash Hashem, under the oak by the sanctuary. So first of all, you're not allowed to put a tree near the sanctuary. That's an avodah zarah. So that's an oddity into itself. Second of all, what is the mikdash doing in Shechem? Everything about this story is odd. And on top of that, we've been in Shechem before. If you remember, way back when were we in Shechem before? And I don't mean in a tour, in a tiyul or in a siyur, right? When was Yehoshua in Shechem? Yehoshua was in Shechem. Shechem is the city that lies between the two mountains of Har Grizim and Har Eval. And we were there back in chapter 8. After the Battle of Ai, Yehoshua took all the people to Shechem, and he built a Mizbeach, Az Yivneh, this is chapter 8, Az Yivneh Yehoshua Mizbeach L'Hashem Elokei So B'Har Eval. And he put the stones there, and he took the stones out of the Yarden, and there, V'chol Yisrael Uzkenav V'Shotav V'Shoftav Omdim Mizem Mizeh, all the leaders, the elders, the officers, the judges, etc., standing there, and he enacts the Livarech et Ha'am, and he enacts this whole ceremony of Har Grizim, half on Har Grizim and half on Har Eval, and he engages them in blessings and curses, like the whole brit of brachot uklalot that we have in the Torah. We had that in Shechem, in Perek Chai. But that was before we finished the conquest. That we said at the time was because it was the only place we could go to. There was nowhere else. They were able to reach. The rest of the country had still to be conquered and settled. But we're in chapter 24. We're at the end of the story. Why go back to Shechem? Does everybody understand the question? The key to unlocking this parak lies in two questions. Number one, why are we in Shechem? And number two, what is the sequence of events of this chapter? Meaning, we were in Shechem in chapter 8, we're in Shechem again in chapter 24. In chapter 23, Yehoshua is at the end of his life. In chapter 24, the next chapter, he's enacting a brit on the mountain in the city of Shechem, when the Mishkan is in Shiloh. So we need to sort out the sequence of events here. So I'm going to share with you three different approaches to the question of when this story takes place that will help us understand what is this story about. So we're going to go on a journey. Follow me, as they say. The first approach is the simplest. And that is simplest in terms of the text, more complicated in terms of understanding. And that is the opinion of the Radak. And the Radak, and many others with him, but as an example, Radak says, Vayasof Yehoshua, at the beginning of this parak, Yehoshua gathered them together, Pamacheret, a second time, meaning an additional time. In addition to what? In addition to the previous chapter, we had already Yehoshua gathered the people in chapter 23. So now in chapter 24, he gathers them again. And this time with a little more oomph, with a little more tochacha, a little more admonition, a little more critique. Once, twice. So that they would be very careful to guard the Torah, to observe the Torah. How do we get to Shechem, and how do we get to a Mikdash, and how do we get to be before God if the Mishkan is in Shiloh? So to answer that, the Radak says something very simple, but very problematic, which is Shehiviu Aron Ha'elokim Sham. They must have taken the ark from the Kodesh HaKadoshim, from the Holy of Holies, in the Mishkan, in Shiloh, and brought it to Shechem. Because the Brit was Lifnei Hashem. The Brit had to be before God. The Brit had to be in the Mikdash. And the Mikdash can only mean that there was an ark. And he wrote Sefer Torah Elokim, Niraki Shamaya Aron Shebo Sefer Torah. He wrote this story into the Sefer Torah Elokim, which is a piece of the story we're not going to address today. We're going to address next week or in 2 weeks. But Yehoshua wrote this story down into a Sefer called Sefer Torah Elokim. The Sefer Torah that we have is in the ark. So therefore the ark must have been. And that's how he understands how there's a mikdash there. The mikdash is in the Mishkan of Shiloh. It's wherever the ark is the mikdash. In this case, the ark is now in Shechem temporarily. Why would you take the ark out of the Holy of Holies and bring it to Shechem? Do you have a Mishkan in Shiloh? Why not just go to Shiloh? Just to put in perspective, how far is Shechem from Shiloh? Here is Shechem, right? Also known as Nablus in today's English lexicon. And this is the city of Shiloh. They're not far from each other. Shechem is in Menashe, Shiloh is in Menashe, bordering with Ephraim. They're not far. Why did he have to take them to Shechem? Why couldn't he have stayed in Shiloh? So the Radak says he took them to Shechem for its symbolism. The Asfam Yehoshua Shechem v'lo Shiloh. By the way, the English is here. It's on the other side of this column. I apologize for that. One word of open parentheses sidebar about the translations. I didn't have any translations to these texts, so I tried something new for a change, and that is that rather than freestyle translating, which I did not have the time for, I apologize. I threw it into an AI generator and generated the translations from the AI. So no guarantee on the translations, but they're pretty good. V'esfam Yehoshua Shechem v'lo Shiloh. Why? Why did he bring him to Shechem? Ulai, options. Al pi hadibur, maybe because God told him to. Although we have no such command, but maybe God instructed him to. Sheyichutu abrit b'Shechem. Why in Shechem? So here the Radak offers several possibilities. Number one, kivon itakev Avraham Avinu tchila k'shenichnas la'aretz. Maybe it's because we're now making a brit over the loyalty of God of the people to God, and that brit starts with a description of the story of the Jewish people. There's a whole history lesson at the beginning of it. That history lesson goes all the way back to Terach Avi Avraham. Now we haven't addressed at all the question of why it goes back to Terach. That's coming eventually. But it does. And so it's the story of Abraham journeying from Terach to the beginning of the land of Israel. What's the first city Abraham comes to? when he enters the land of Israel in Parshat Lech Lecha. The very first place he comes to is Shechem, and there he builds a Mizbeach, Elon Moreh. So maybe that's why he took him back to Shechem. As it says, Avraham ba'aretz ad makom Shechem. Avraham came to the land of Shechem. One possibility. Another possibility, Kisham nasa nes gadol Yaakov Avinu v'sheyizkidu oto v'yidbeku bo l'Hashem levado, because of the great miracle that occurred to Yaakov. What miracle occurred to Yaakov? After the story of Dinah, when Shechem, when Shimon and Levi went to war against the city of Shechem, Yaakov somehow emerged from that story unscathed. That was a great miracle. Come back to that story at a later time. V'od, ki b'tchilat ha'nachala asher היה ליעקב בארץ ישראל בשכם היה. The first place Yaakov purchased land, settled, was in Shechem. Shekanach chelkat hasadeh miyad b'nei chamo avi Shechem, because he bought the land from chamo avi Shechem. It says that he bought the land for 100 kasita. Later in year, we'll see at the end of the Sefer that Yehoshua is buried there. And that's exactly where Yehoshua instructs them, to remove the idols from their midst, like Yaakov, who said in Shechem, that parallel is very powerful. That parallel actually, I'm going to come back to that in 1 second. One last Radak, and that is a reference here that in the Mikdash Hashem. Sorry, I meant to read this earlier. The Mikdash Hashem is a reference to wherever the Aron was, and the Aron was in Shechem. That's called Mikdash Hashem. What's this parallel here? So, if you look at the two psukim that I put underneath in this chart. Source 5 is the psukim we just read in Yehoshua. Yeshua instructs them to remove the idols from the midst. We haven't addressed the question of how is it possible that the Bnei Yisrael at the end of Yeshua's life was sitting in they've just finished the conquest, have idols in their midst. We haven't addressed that question, but let's assume for the moment that they do. Yeshua instructs them to remove their idols from their midst. And at the end of the story, Yehoshua writes all of this Brit down in a Sefer Tarat Elokim, in a Sefer of some kind, and he takes a big stone and he establishes it there, Tachat Ha'ala Asher B'Mikdash Hashem, under the oak by the Mikdash. These two psukim together are very reminiscent in language and in substance to the exact story of Yaakov and Shechem. Yaakov, at the end of the story of Shechem, after the story of Dinah, after the story of Shimon and Levi, Yaakov is returning to Beit El. Vayomer Elokim al Yaakov, kum ale Beit El. Just to put in perspective, he starts in Shechem. Right? He's coming back from the house of Lavan along the Abok River. He crosses the Yarden, he comes to the city of Shechem. And then after the whole episode in Shechem, he heads south to Beit El, which is where he was initially when he made the Matzevah, as he left to go to Israel, to go to the house of Lavan. So there, God says to him, come, it's time to go back to Beit El and dwell there and to make the Mizbeach. Vayomer Yaakov el Beito, Yaakov turns to his household, at this point his entire household, which consists of his wives and all his children, Ve'el kol asher imo, and all the servants who were with him. And he says to them, Hasidu et Elohei hanechar asher b'tochachem. Remove the idols from your midst. V'hitaru v'achlivusim lotachem, and purify yourselves, and mikvah, etc. You have to purify yourselves from all of the idols. And then we can go to Beit El, and we can build a mizbeach there, to God who answered me in the time of my distress. Vayitnu al Yaakov et kol Elohei hanechar asher b'yadam. Unless you think this is just, you'll pardon the pun, idle words, right? This is, they actually give to Yaakov all the idols that they had in their midst. And the gold. And Yaakov buries them tachat ha'ela asher im Shechem, under the tree, the oak, which was by Shechem. In our parak, Yehoshua builds a stone, a monument, and he places it under the Allah Asher Mikdash Hashem, the oak, which is by the Mikdash, which is wherever the Aron is. But he also tells them to remove the idols from the midst. So the language here is very reminiscent of the story of Shechem. Says the Radak, maybe that's why they went to Shechem, because that was part of the agenda. So either they went to Shechem because they're going to remind them the story of Terach and Abraham, and Abraham's first place in Israel was Shechem, or because Yaakov fought for Shechem, or because Yaakov had purchased land in Shechem. Abraham purchased land in Marat Machpelah, so maybe they should have gone to Hebron. That would have made a little bit more sense, maybe. Or because of the connection to the idols that they removed from Shechem. In all cases, the Radak says they went to Shechem, now the end of Yeshua's life. One possible theory, additional theory as to why they go to Shechem, which again, we're going to somewhat veer from that possibility in a second, but one additional explanation I heard from Rabbi Ben that they go to Shechem, unlike the Radak's interpretation, sort of for the exact reversal, the exact opposite. Shechem was a symbol of the idolatry of Canaan. Shechem was a Canaanite city, and because it was a Canaanite city, according to this theory, we're going to move in a different direction in a second. But let's assume for the moment it's a Canaanite city. And so he takes them to Shechem as a kind of a symbol of this is not what we want. This is what we want to reject. We want to reject the culture that's here, and we want to build our own culture, our own brit with God. And so Shechem serves in that regard as a kind of a backdrop of moving away from the idolatry of Shechem. I'm not sure I buy that completely, but again, we're left with this mystery. They go to Shechem at the end, the very last chapter of Yeshua's life. Okay, let's go back to the text for a second. I have a bunch of questions, and all of these questions are going to lead to I need to kind of look at an alternative explanation for what's going on. The most important question I have is, does Yehoshua sound in this chapter like he's an old man at the end of his life?
No.
No, right? That's really the issue. In chapter 23, one chapter earlier, Yehoshua begins by describing that he's old. It's like Moshe on the last day of his life. Moshe, 120 years old, on the day he says to the people, Moshe dies on his birthday, 120. But of Moshe, it says that his strength never waned. It's a pasuk on the Torah. Moshe's strength never waned. Moshe was as strong as he was in the height of his leadership on the last day of his life. Of Yehoshua, you can't say that. Yehoshua is Zaken Ba'Bayamim. Yehoshua is old. And Yehoshua turns to the people, and the first thing he says to them is, Ani Zakanti Ba'Bayamim. I'm old. I'm advanced in years. I can't do it anymore. It's up to you now. And he hands the mantle of leadership over to the next generation. Next chapter, he brings everybody to Shechem, and he yells at them, and he scolds them, and he tells them that they're not going to be able to live up to the brit, and he takes all the idols, and he buries them under the... that's an old man on the day of his death.
Maybe he has the second wind.
Maybe. Entirely, again, for the Radak, you'd have to say that, but the simplest reading of this chapter sounds like he's not so old. Not only that, if you go to Pasuk Tedvav for a moment, Yehoshua seems to give them a choice, which we're going to come to in a second, of what they want to do with this brit. If it be evil in your eyes to serve God, choose. I give you an option. Here are your options. And who are you going to choose? Who are you going to serve? Option one, you can serve the gods that your ancestors served on the other side of the river. Or the Amorite gods in whose midst you live. V'anochi uveiti na'avod et Hashem. But as for me and my household, we will serve God. Let's assume for the moment Yehoshua is like Moshe, the last speech of his life. Aniza kanti b'yamim is the last day of his life, or last week, or last month. What does Ani uveiti na'avod et Hashem? I and my household will serve God. Yehoshua, you're at the end of your life. What's he saying to them? The implication being, or the impression you get when you read this parak, is this is Yehoshua preparing for the people to live in the land of Israel, but he's not leaving them. So is this a much younger Yehoshua? That's the mystery here. And on top of that mystery, where is this parak? Why are they in Shechem? And when did this story take place? Because it sounds like Yehoshua is younger than the last day of his life. Let's call it that. There's several other questions here that beg themselves and that have to be asked. One is it's a very odd historical overview of Jewish history. Why start with Jewish history and give them a whole lesson? We're talking, Yehoshua has been leading this generation in battle for 14 years. He led them in battle for 7 years. He led them since they crossed over the Yarden. He's led them in battle the 7 years of conquest, then the 7 years of settlement. Now he's 20 years? Let's assume 20 years later, if it's at the end of his life. And suddenly he's going to go back and review for them all of history. And it's a very selective overview of history. He starts, first of all, with Terach. There's no other overview of Jewish history that starts with Terach. Every overview of Jewish history starts with Abraham. This is the only place in all of Tanakh outside of Sefer Bereshit where Terach is even mentioned. What's he starting with in Terach? Starting with Terach for? And then he starts with a series of events in history. Abraham comes to the land of Israel. Yitzchak. We skipped Yishmael. Okay, Yishmael was from Hagar. We can skip Yishmael if we want. We get to Yaakov and Esav. Esav goes down to Seir. Yaakov goes down to Mitzrayim. Then we skip the whole Shibud. Right? We skip the whole slavery, and we go straight to Moshe and Aaron, who took him out of Egypt. And of all the events of the Yetziat Mitzrayim, right, none of the Makot are mentioned. Yam Suf is mentioned. And then after Yam Suf, we come to the Midbar. All the events of the Midbar are skipped. We come to the story of Sichon and Og and Balak. We come to the wars they fought in the Midbar. And then they crossed over the Yarden and they fought Yerich. What happened to Mamad HaSinai? I mean, skip Mamad HaSinai. Skip the man, skip the significant building of the Mishkan, all these events in the Midbar, all skipped. So some aspect of this historical overview needs to be understood what's going on. Then he makes a brit with them, with an Evan, and a stone, and a Edut, and testimony, and he writes a Sefer Torah Elokim. He writes this down, and it sounds like Mamad HaSinai all over again. But the most dramatic part of it comes in Pasuk Tet Vav, where he gives them a choice. Choose. Do you want to serve the gods of your forefathers on the other side of the Nahar? Do you want to serve the gods, the idols of Terach? Or do you want to serve the idols of the Amorites? Or do you want to serve God? That's your choice. Did it give them a real choice? A real choice. Clearly, that can't be a real choice. What's going on here? And do we really think for a moment that the people are still holding on to idols from the days of Avraham, from the days of Terach? 100 years later? I mean, let's assume 300 years later if you deal with, if you assume 210 years in Mitzrayim, if you assume 400 years in Mitzrayim, 500 years later, what? what is happening? So what are our options? So option 2, again, what are our assumptions? Our assumption that Radak says this is happening, everything here is in sequence. We're dealing with a parak that is chronological, and at the end of Yeshua's life, he brings him back to Shem. We don't understand why he's in Shem, and they have this, and they have this reenactment of the Brit. Why it starts with Tarach, unclear. Option 2, and we're going to offer a third well, maybe not today, but next week. And option 2 is alluded to, it's hinted at by the Rabbi. It's actually it's mentioned explicitly by or it's actually implied a little bit. Not too much explicit by the opinion in the Yerushalmi. So Rabbi adds 2 words. The beginning of his parish on Yeshua Perich of Dalid, V'od Zachar, the end of the book, the text also mentions, after the Brit with the elders, Shekvar Asaf Yehoshua Kol Shiftei Yisrael Shchema. That Yehoshua had already assembled all the tribes of Israel in Shechem. Now, the Rabbi doesn't tell us when that event took place, but he does tell us that the events are out of sequence. And that this chapter, even though it's the end of the book, it's really only at the end of the book because we have a list of britot. We have a list of final speeches Yehoshua made. He made a speech with the elders, and there was another speech which he had made with the people of Shechem, which is also mentioned here, but it had actually occurred earlier. That's what these 2 words mean. So that opens up the door for us to explore, when did this happen? So one option is to suggest that it is connected to either the last time they were in Shechem, which is in Perek Chet, and in fact, this suggests, as some do, that this is in fact the continuation or the story of the Brit of Perek Chet, meaning that in Perek Chet, when they went to Hagrizim and Areval, they enacted this entire ceremony of blessings and curses. We talked about that back when we studied it the first time, back in Yehoshua Perek Chet. And he wrote down on stones, Mishneh Torah Moshe, the story of the Torah of Moshe. And he enacted the people in an entire ceremony, Levarechet Am Yisrael Rishonah, to bless them, to write the blessings and curses on Hagrizim and Areval. Half on Hagrizim, half on Areval. Hagrizim and Areval on either side of Shechem. And so maybe this is the content of that Brit. Meaning what we've done is we've split the story. Part of the story is in Perek Chet, the blessings and curses, and part of the story is in chapter 24, which is the details of what Yehoshua said to them when they entered the land of Israel and they went to Shechem, and they went to Hagrizim and Areval, and they had this ceremony of blessings and curses. It also included a reenactment of the Brit. That's what they were doing. By Yichtav Shem Rabbanim, he wrote the words of the Torah. They entered into a Brit there. What was the content of that Brit? The content of that Brit is chapter 24. Read it. Yosef, Yehoshua, Kol Shiftei Yisrael Shchema. Hagrizim, Ha'eval, Shechem, blessings, curses, and continue the story. That's a possibility. And it would open up the question of when this blessings and curses took place. And that's actually fascinating machloket. There's a Yerushalmi that says, 2 opinions in the Yerushalmi as to when the story of the blessings and curses took place. Rabbi Chananya says that it all took place b'yom ofrechem et hayarden, when they crossed the Jordan. And literally that first day before they conquered before they conquered Yericho, they crossed over the Yarden and they went all the way up north to Shechem, blessings and curses. They built the Mizbeach there, and then they came back south. That's one possibility. And if that's true, then that it's out of sequence. Has to explain why it's out of sequence, but nonetheless, that's one interpretation. Rashi says that on Yehoshua Perek Chet. Rashi says that this parsha of this Brit in Shechem in Perek Chet, in the blessings and curses, that's out of order because it happened the day they crossed the Yarden. That's the opinion of Rabbi Chananya. On the other hand, the Malbim says no. The Malbim says that the chapters are in order. Perek Chet happens after the Battle of Ai, right? There's a third opinion. And the third opinion is that of Rabbi Yishmael, who says, Kol biyotchnem lu b'Torah lachar ba'asrei shananim. That anytime it says that they came somewhere in the Sefer Yehoshua, it's after the 14 years. Meaning, they may have put the stones there right away, but brachot uklalot la'achar arba'asrei shananim. But the blessings and curses were at the end of the 14 years. In other words, says Rabbi Yishmael in the Yerushalmi, they come to Shechem twice. This is very important. According to Rabbi Yishmael, they come to Shechem twice. They go to Shechem immediately after they cross the Yarden to place the stones there, Hagrizim and Harevel. That says Rashi, that says the Gemara, because it says B'yom of Rechem et Yarden, the day you cross the Yarden. But that's not when they enacted the Brit of the blessings and curses. The half in Hagrizim and half in Harevel, and the Brit with Bnei Yisrael, that didn't happen then. That happens at the end of the 14 years. End of the 14 years means what? It means that we're not at the end of Yeshua's life, because Yeshua's life goes on for many years after the 14 years of conquest and division. Right? Yeshua's a young man. How old is Yeshua when he comes into the land, when he leads them over the Yarden? When he was sent as a spy, he was the grandson of the Nasi of the Shevet. At the beginning of, just to put the chronology together, right? At the beginning of after Yitzhak Mitzrayim, Yeshua is a young man. Yeshua is Moshe's disciple. He's called a Na'ar. Right? He's sent of the spies because the spies are the grandchildren of the Nasiim. They're the next generation, of the young generation. So how old was he? 20, 30? Let's assume. At the end of the 40 years, he now takes on the mantle of leadership. Let's assume we'll even give him the benefit of the doubt that he was 40 at the time of the spies and he's 80 when he crosses into when he takes over the mantle of leadership. Puts him into kind of a parallel to Moshe. He's certainly not older than that. So 14 years of conquest will bring him to the age of, 80, 90 years old, 94. But he dies at 110. So what the Yerushalmi is suggesting is that the Brit with the blessings and curses happens on Hagrizim and Hareval, separate from the story of Perek. It's actually a later event. So I'm not taking it out and putting it earlier. I'm taking it out and putting it later. Oh, suddenly now I have a window. What's my window? My window is to suggest that the blessings and curses in chapter 8 is in fact the same story as our chapter, but they're not happening the moment they cross the Yarden. They're happening at the end of the conquest, which makes sense, right? This sounds like, this whole parak sounds like it's the end of the story, right? The Yeshua is giving them a final brit, a summation speech, etc. But he's not dying. It's not the end of his life. So that's exactly what the Yerushalmi seems to imply, that it's this window. It's right, the 14 years of conquest is finished, and now Yehoshua gathers them all together in Shechem for the ceremony of blessings and curses, for the brachot and klalot, for the brit, for a review of history, and for a final reenactment, if you will, of Ma'amad HaSinai. And that, in other words, what I'm suggesting, and the hint to that is in chapter 8, this reference again to Kol Yisrael's Genav Shotav V'Shoftav Umdim Mizel Aaron, that the Brit took place with the elders and the Shotrim and the Shoftim and the Zkenim, right? The same language as the beginning of our chapter. Sort of an allusion to that. What I'm suggesting is that, according to this interpretation, our chapter is in fact out of place. It's an earlier event. It belongs at the end of the Sefer because it's after the 7 years of conquest and division. It's combined with the Brit of the blessings and curses, which is a Brit. Right? They enact a Brit. That's exactly what it says. The content of that Brit is here. The form of that Brit is the blessings and curses in chapter 8. And you put them together and you understand why they're in Shechem. They're in Shechem because the Torah instructed them to go to Hagrizim and are able to enact this Brit. And that's what pulls them together. That's the second possibility. The problem I have, or the unresolved question, assuming we're the same event, chapter 8, the blessings and curses, chapter 24, the Brit, assuming they are one and the same, again comes back to the same issue, which is why start with Terach? Why go back to, does Yeshua give them a real choice not to follow the path of the Torah? He says, I'll give you a choice. Bacharu lechem. What would have happened if they would have said, okay, we're out? Would he have said, okay? What would have happened if the response to Pasuk Tedvav, whom are you going to serve? The gods of your forefathers on the other side of the Yarden, or the gods of the Amorites. What would have happened if here they would have said, Yehoshua, you're right, we're out? Like, what does it mean? And when
you would have said they're not Jewish.
But we're talking about Bnei Yisrael. We're talking about, what, 50, 60, 70 years after Mount Sinai? And then they would have said, right? And then Yehoshua said, after they say, no, we chas v'shalom, Yehoshua, how could you say that to us? We want to serve God. What does Yehoshua say to them? Yeshua says, nothing doing. You're not able to do it. You're not going to be successful. And he gives them an option again. He says, God is jealous. God is jealous. God is not going to let you do that. You're going to abandon God. You're right. What are you talking about? Who gave them an option? Who gave them an out? We're talking about Ma'amad Sinai. One of the most fundamental concepts of Ma'amad Sinai is that the Brit is eternal. It's philosophically eternal. It's textually eternal. It's halachically eternal. How could you give them a choice? So this is this is the mystery. Who are we, to put it simply, who are we talking to? That Yeshua could possibly give them a choice. Especially if we're at the end of the 14 years of the conquest. We're talking to the Bnei Yisrael now, and all the tribes are sitting in all the land of Israel. He gathers them together. He's talking to the people of Shotrav, Ziknav, they get Svulif Ne'elakim, Vayomer Yeshua Kol Ha'am. What is that? So true to form, we haven't finished, and so we have to resolve this piece of this puzzle. This is a very important piece of the puzzle. Who are we talking to in Shechem that could possibly, right, how does Yeshua gather all the people to Shechem and then give them a choice to opt out? And why start with Terach? We really believe, and to believe that there are people there in Bnei Yisrael who are holding on to the idols from the days of Terach, and he takes them, right? He takes them and he buries them. At the end of the story. He says, now give me all the idols. Okay, pull them out of your pockets. Let's go. He goes and collects them all. And they buried them. What is going on? So we're going to have to unpack this one last time, which is going to be the subject for next week. So Bezrat Hashem, I will update the office that we're going to take this part of this chapter one more week. I apologize for that. I really hope to start Shoftim next week, but it was a pipe dream. I wasn't really anticipating that we'd finish this today. And we will finish this Bezrat Hashem next week with a third approach to this parak that I think is really quite extraordinary and astounding. And then you can choose which option you want to take, which option you buy, Radak or this opinion that we talked about today, which is that it's connected to the Brachot Klalot of Parak Chet, or a third possibility for which you'll have to come back next week if you want to hear it, or you'll have to listen to the recording. Either way, we will start with this next week, Bezrat Hashem. And if we finish it early, then, which shouldn't take too long, then we will move on. And if not, then we will start Shoftim the week following. And with that, we will conclude today, and I will be happy to take questions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Yasher koach, yasher koach.
My pleasure. All right. Be well, everybody. Have a wonderful day and or evening.
Just
We will
wanted
see
to
you
point
next week.
out,
Excuse me?
wanted to point out the end of Shoftim and Shmuel also seem to be out of order. So
Sorry, say that again. Which is out of order?
the end of Shoftim and the end of Shmuel, the last
The end. Yes, they are both out of
also
order.
seem to
Correct.
be out of order.
That is correct. They are both out of order. That is a very in order comment. That both the end of Shoftim and the end of Shmuel end with chapters that are out of sequence, almost like a postscript to the book. Yeah, it would be more significant, I think, if the book of Malachim was also like that. But Malachim does not end that way. Malachim, everything is very chronological. So that is an interesting observation. All right.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you.